Our oceans are the reason we're alive. They breathe for us, provide for us. We have a rare blue planet floating in space, which has offered life to humans since we evolved. At first, I just wanted to see every marine species on the planet. But early in my journey, my eyes opened to the harsh reality. My species was on a path of destruction, and other forms of life viewed as disposable income. This attitude has changed the most important life source on the planet, our oceans.
This is an ecosystem that's been around for a very long time, millions upon millions of years. And the fact is that it should disappear on our watch. It's not a fire drill, this is the real thing. Over time, we're removing cards. We've destroyed coral reefs, we've destroyed kelp forests and so on. And at some point, when we take that next card out, there's a real chance the whole thing will collapse.
In this journey, we explore the oceans and changing seas. Through science, we explain dramatic changes and the demise of one of the world's largest ecosystems. I look to nature for inspiration. Can we somehow, amidst all the confusion, turn the tide and unite people to protect the legacy of the world, rich in life, to pass on to future generations? About 97% of the Earth's water is the ocean, covering more than 70% of the surface of our planet. Man has named and created 5 oceans. But in reality, all oceans are connected, making one giant body of water that flows and ebbs and moves with the tide. Oceans are Earth's lifeline, producing more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere, while absorbing the majority of the carbon.
So Tim, I love the ocean because it's just so beautiful. But how important is the ocean for this planet to be like planet Earth?
Well, to be like planet Earth as we know it, the ocean is probably the most important factor, because it's our oceans that basically dictate our weather. So if the oceans go pear-shaped, then our weather's going to go pear-shaped. And if our weather goes pear-shaped, that's going to have massive repercussions for us as humans, because our weather dictates where we live, what we eat, how we can travel, whether we can survive or not.
We've had some pretty wild weather here on the Gold Coast. Cyclonic wind conditions, or almost cyclonic, ferocious waves, and you combine these two elements and you get a freak of nature.
So the worst possible scenarios are high carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, which is going to give you raised acid levels in the oceans because it forms carbonic acid as water falls through the atmosphere. Increased temperatures. Now, increased temperatures will also mean that your big ocean currents will change, because the warmer the water, the more it's going to rise to the top. But if you're a tiny, tiny creature, it could be a massive shock. So we're looking at high acidic levels and high temperatures. And if the currents are affected, then are they going to speed up, slow down? So it's an interesting scenario, and we can guess what's going to happen, but we don't really know what's going to happen.
I think the best analogy to the oceans is that they are the heart and lungs of the planet. If you ever look at a sped up picture of the planet, you know, when you can actually see the currents moving, you see that it's almost pulsing like a heart. And at the same time, it's exchanging gases across the surface of the ocean. which is taking up CO2 and producing oxygen, absorbing a lot of heat. Now that we're generating extra heat, a lot of that's going into the ocean. So there's a real whole range of almost physiological properties to the ocean. And it's vital. I mean, you can't do without heart and lungs, and a planet can't do without its ocean.
The first time I descended to the white sandy ocean floor, I saw a world beyond imagination. A place where marine species were suspended in a liquid space. But in a world of deep blue, most of the species in the ocean realm are dependent on coral reefs. Coral reefs take up only 2% of the ocean floor. But reefs are the rainforests of the oceans. There is one reef that eclipses them all.
This is Australia's Great Barrier Reef, where you can see the mastery of nature at work. No living structure on our entire Earth compares to this natural masterpiece, which has layer upon layer of history embedded in its coral walls. Down there, every little species carries out its life in a beautiful coral setting. And no matter how big or small they are, they all play a vital role in this ecosystem.
Here, some of the tiniest creatures on the planet, the coral polyps, have created the largest living structure on Earth that you can see from space. Corals are forever giving. They reproduce asexually, continually dividing to grow their colonies. This monumental role builds the reef foundation that may well be critical for our survival on planet Earth. I have visited hundreds of isolated reefs around the world. Far North Australia was an untamed diversity hotspot.
Now we're going to follow the same chain of reefs that makes up the Great Barrier Reef, but we are officially out of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Zone. Now this is some of the most isolated diving in the world, and there's every chance we may not even see another boat.
The first time I visited this region, it was an untouched paradise. We went as far as Ashmore Reef, located just below Papua New Guinea. Ashmore is an atoll rising from the deep blue. On top, sand has gathered, forming a lagoon. In early 2000, this ecosystem bustled with schools of extremely large fish and healthy corals. But over thousands of dives in oceans around the world, I watched as life beneath the sea changed. The Coral Triangle is a marine area located in the Western Pacific Ocean. Named for its staggering number of corals, it holds some of the world's richest marine biodiversity. Over 120 million people live within the Coral Triangle and rely on its coral reefs for food, income, and protection from storms. Reefs taught me that biodiversity is truly the key to life on Earth.
Corals are said to have formed over 500 million years ago, and locked within coral reefs today is a diary of environmental change. But over the past decades, alarm bells have been ringing, and many of our reefs today are very degraded, especially in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean. But even Australia's Great Barrier Reef, the biggest and best protected reef of all, is facing a troubled future.
Corals were born into an inviting ocean, a clean ocean, and a constant ocean. For 18,000 years, the Great Barrier Reef perfected the art of growing. But corals were not quite ready for the 20th century. 2014 is the year etched in my memory. The excitement of being back at Ashmore Reef was for me a trip of a lifetime, and expectations were high. But no sooner did I descend below the water, the story that unfolded changed the way I feel about our modern world forever.
Now, we've been diving inside the bay here, and what we've noticed is a lot of the corals have died. We're still trying to piece together why an environment like this would have so many of its big staghorn corals fall over.
These are enormous changes. Ocean acidification, this property of CO2 going into the ocean and souring the upper layers of the ocean. I mean, that's happening at a rate that's faster than anything in the last 65 million years. I mean, that's frightening. We know that the acidity of seawater is important, but we've now changed it by 26%. We've increased the acidity of seawater.
And there were dives where there were gorgonians that were 18 feet wide and soft corals bigger than me. But what I've seen on this return journey is a lot of the places that were just absolutely flourishing with life. Now, after 2 or 3 cyclones and extreme warm weather, these reefs, it's a bit like seeing a ghost.
But we lost half of the corals on the Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest ecosystem in terms of corals. It's the size of Italy. It's this mega place, and it's half gone. That's hard to believe, but it's true. We surveyed 150 kilometres of underwater territory, not a healthy reef anywhere. And I think that's where a lot of scientists have ended up now, is that we've been telling people of the problems for a very long time and have been ignored.
The body requires all its body organs to function and work together. It's just like the planet. If the ecosystems aren't working together and the ecosystems aren't healthy, then the planet's not healthy.
The wet tropics rainforest World Heritage Area is only about 10% of the length of the Great Barrier Reef. But in that zone, those 2 World Heritage Areas meet, and animals don't know the difference. From the inshore coral reefs to the tops of the mountains to the dry forests to the west, it's an incredibly varied landscape.
I'm in the beautiful Daintree National Park, which is 120,000 hectares of beautifully protected rainforest. This is the Daintree River, and some of the mountains that you see behind me are some of the wildest and remote rainforest in the world.
This part of Australia is what Australia used to once look like, a continental-wide rainforest, but the Australian continent moved north, dried out, and it's receded to here. And this particular rainforest surrounding us are some of the most ancient and primitive flowering plants on Earth. It's consistent rainfall off the Coral Sea. It's this incredible mountain range behind us being a magnet for that rain, and it's just been here for a very long time, unaffected by volcanism, unaffected by glaciation, unaffected by sea level rise. It is truly one of nature's greatest triumphs. As the water wears the mountain down, the finer sediment moves downstream and moves away with the floods, but the bigger stuff stays behind. So it starts with huge rocks on the top of Thornton's Peak, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till they get to the mouth and they become fine sediment. Nature has its own filter. Remove the tree layer in the vegetation and we allow that sediment out onto that reef. So rainforests are the kidneys of the Great Barrier Reef.
Like rainforests, wetlands also play a vital role in purifying water. So what's the importance of this intertidal zone that we're standing at here?
Oh, this is exactly where I can see the 2 World Heritage Areas of the reef and the rainforest meeting, and how much these 2 landscapes and seascapes are interdependent. What I see in particular is the residual of the rainforest in terms of the black matter that we're seeing, which is leaf foliage that's come down from the mountains, been deposited along the shorelines or as part of the mangrove. And that, of course, is the basics of the food chain cycle for so much of the marine life.
The value of ecosystems extend far and wide. They're the fabric of life on Earth. But how is man changing the ecosystems that feed into our Great Barrier Reef?
On the Great Barrier Reef, water quality has been declining for over a century. So we think of it as a modern problem, but actually It began with the arrival of new farming methods and groups of people that deforested river catchments.
Right now, we are working to end the deforestation crisis in Queensland, which is killing millions of native animals every year, causing more muddy runoff to flow into the Great Barrier Reef and making our climate worse. So this is not a campaign, though, that is recent. This campaign has been fought for many years. Back in the 90s, the Wilderness Society worked with other environment organisations to get some of the first laws that stopped deforestation in Queensland.
Most clearing that's happening in Queensland and in reef catchments now is of acacia, eucalypt, open eucalypt forest. So it's not dense rainforest that's being bulldozed. By far the majority is relatively open eucalypt forests and in the western parts of the catchments. And of course it's mostly for livestock pasture. We're looking at about 45 million animals being killed by tree clearing in Queensland alone. It's more if you take in other states. And about 5,000 koalas too have been killed in the last 3 years because of bulldozing of their habitats. We don't really have a strong idea how badly impacted our ecosystems are because of the loss of keystone species. What's the impact of losing particularly burrowing animals, so all those bettongs, wombats that used to turn over soils were essential for forest health. They turned over nutrients, and so losing that, has impoverished the forest in ways that we aren't able to characterise very well.
We have lost a lot of our land clearing laws under the previous government, so clearing is up at rates on par with Brazil. It's been reported this year in this state alone of Queensland. Clearing of vegetation upstream of reef catchments erodes the banks and ends up with a lot of impacts to the water quality of our reef, which reduces the resilience of the reef to climate change.
The other replacement land use that's of huge concern in the reef catchments, of course, is agriculture, is cropping. Because what do you get from cropping? Well, you get a lot of bare soil, so you get all that sediment erosion as well. But you also get all the pesticides. Many pesticides are toxic to fish, kill fish, they kill frogs. You get herbicides, and the herbicides flush into the water and kill the algae, kill the coral, they kill the seagrass. And then you get fertiliser, and fertiliser again goes in and stimulates things like crown of thorns starfish. So all these knock-on impacts, not just from removing the trees, but what comes after.
I've seen the effects of pesticide runoff in rivers and in oceans. In Hawaii, where the shoreline is close to the agriculture, turtles clearly show how deadly chemicals can be.
For me, to go around Maui and see the tumours all over the turtles on almost every beach is just heartbreaking because it screams pesticide poisoning. We know it's runoff from the rain. It's brought to very dangerous chemicals from making food or sugar or pineapple down onto the beach, and the end result is the lemur gets poisoned, the turtle eats it, and some of the turtles are just horrific to look at.
Turtles are a big attractant because they bring lots of tourists and people love seeing turtles in the environment. But are you saying most of the turtles around here in Maui actually have effects from runoff, from pesticides?
The bulk of them. If you find any turtle over a couple years old, once they get, 2 feet across the carapace, you'll see that there's growths around the neck, on the fins, and then when you get to the older cows, like if you get a chance, stop at Ho'okipa or some of the other beaches and get up close to the larger turtles, you'll see really bad growths, especially all over the heads, because they're just run around with helicopters spraying Garlon 4 up high up in the hills on an invasive plant called Myconia.
Well, there's a whole class called photosystem 2 herbicides, which we'd like to see basically banned in reef catchments. So only use herbicides that have low toxicity for corals and seagrass. Ideally, we get rid of them altogether. That's probably not realistic, but certainly to constrain the types of pesticides and how they're applied in reef catchments.
More than 50% of forests have gone in 100 years. Forest clearing is at its highest point ever.
And this is where some of the tallest trees in the world end up as wood chips to supply the paper industry. But as we take down the beautiful old-growth forests and replace them with plantation timbers, we not only knock out the biodiversity, but we take down some of the most carbon-rich forests in the entire world.
There's important rainforests everywhere, and each one of them is important in a world in which it's disappearing by the football fields every day.
In the south, temperate old-growth rainforests are vital for stable climatic temperatures everywhere.
These forests have been absorbing carbon for thousands of years. Half of it's in the ground, in the peat and in the root systems.
On the equator, old-growth forests cover some of the hottest parts of our planet. Both temperate and equatorial forests are being displaced for timber, or in the warmer zones, palm oil plantations, as the world craves for vegetable oil. Places like Borneo, Indonesia, Malaysia, and many parts of Asia are taking down the life support systems. As the forests come down, species are disappearing, and the carbon-rich resource goes into the atmosphere. The more carbon in the atmosphere, the more our oceans have to absorb carbon to compensate.
The biggest events that have really impacted on the number of species and what we have on the planet have been the so-called mass extinction events, and there's been 5 of those that we know about. Most of them actually happened over time periods where change occurred over thousands of years. So it was a gentle shift up and a shift down, and even so, that amount of change drove enormous amounts of extinction. And so you come to today, and apart from really what we saw in 65 million years ago in an event which happened because of a meteor striking the Yucatan in Mexico and killing the dinosaurs, if you look at what we're doing today, it sort of exceeds these mass extinction events in terms of the amount of change that we're forcing onto nature. If you chop down the forests, you start to tip the balance globally in terms of the uptake of CO2 versus all the other activities that go on that release CO2. And the ocean is sort of a bit like insurance in a way, because not so easy to extinguish photosynthesis in the ocean as you see on land. If you chop down forests, you really do lose enormous amounts of activity. Whereas the ocean, the organism that does all the heavy lifting, is one of the smallest creatures on the planet, and it's phytoplankton.
Our oceans now are thought by scientists to be pretty much saturated in terms of the amount of carbon they can sequester or store, and that's what's causing ocean acidification and ocean temperatures to rise. There are some things we can do to remove carbon out of the atmosphere, and that includes not logging or clearing native vegetation, especially temperate forests, which can be some of the world's largest carbon stores.
This is carbon dioxide that was locked away over millions of years worth of carbon dioxide being sucked out of the atmosphere and stuck away in the bowels of the Earth. And we know from the geological record that these huge releases of carbon dioxide, for example, from volcanism and also from meteorite impacts, released vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, caused global warming and several mass extinctions because the Earth became too hot. And it was all because of that carbon dioxide. And then it took millions of years for that to be locked away again, slowly soaked up into the oceans and into swamps again. And here we are, just liberating it all again.
In Queensland, as we know, we're going through this massive question about whether or not to open up another new large coal mine in central Queensland, which sounds absolutely crazy when we're facing this debacle of the climate change affecting the health of the Great Barrier Reef. Up and down the reef coastline, we have coal ports that are shipping coal out through the Great Barrier Reef to be burnt in other countries around the world, which increases climate change, adds to the climate crisis.
The urgency here is to consider what people call the carbon budget, which is how much CO2 left to emit to the atmosphere before we get into trouble, go beyond 2 degrees Celsius. That turns out to be around 700 gigatons of carbon dioxide that we can release into the atmosphere without having disastrous consequences. We burn around about 40 to 45 gigatons of carbon dioxide each year. Let's think about the Galilee Basin that has all this coal that people want to dig up and ship overseas and burn. That takes up 2/3 of that carbon budget. And then, of course, China and India and all these countries have their own coal reserves. So when you add all those coal reserves up, the things that are on the books in terms of, superannuation funds and whatever, it turns out there's 15,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide to emit to the atmosphere if we burnt all of those coal stocks.
Climate change is a symptom of our use of material. We're digging stuff out of the ground for energy. We dig stuff out of the ground to make plastic, that's made basically out of oil, clothes, everything. So climate change is a result of our material use. And every year we use only 7% of the stuff that we dig out of the ground more than once. So, that's what's driving climate change. Waste.
Now, you might think that I am in some kind of village rubbish dump. But to tell you the truth, I'm on these very remote and beautiful islands that we think are pristine. But unfortunately, in this day and age, with all the garbage that people put into our oceans, it gets caught in currents. And even the islands that are far away and never visited by people end up looking like this. And probably the worst of all are plastics and discarded nets that get cut up and thrown into the ocean.
Plastics is a big problem globally. It's right through our oceans right now, on our beaches, our waterways. Those that eat seafood, it's ending up in us, a toxic soup. But there's a lot that we can do locally to have a global impact. And be that, you go to the beach, bring home 3 bits of plastic or marine debris, or buy a keep cup for your coffees, or a water bottle, or take your bags to the shopping centre. It's really not rocket science.
Turtles are unfortunately threatened for extinction, so it's a subject that's close to my heart, and it's about giving back, it's about inspiring people, it's about raising awareness about what we can do. When I realised there's something happening that we're contributing to that is irreplaceable. Once they're extinct, they never come back. Rather than being complacent and not doing anything, what is it that I can do? And taking steps to make that happen, and then sharing that with the world. This piece of artwork was created to deliver the message of what's really going on. Their motto is that our turtles have had a gutful, and a gutful of plastic. It's saying that it's time to make a difference, it's time to make a change, and that change starts within, it starts from us.
But the devastation of plastics is dwarfed by the effect that climate change will have. As carbon warms up our planet, the temperature of the sand might determine the fate of our sea turtles. Scientists have been monitoring the turtles' eggs and documenting changes.
I'm here at Mon Repose on the eastern coast of Australia. We're near Bundaberg, and this is the most important hatchery for loggerhead turtles on the eastern coast of Australia. And I'm with Ranger Shane.
Hello.
Yeah? He's going to tell us about these amazing, gorgeous little turtles.
Because of the excessive heat, any temperatures above 32 or 33 degrees Celsius affect the hatchlings that are in the egg, and it may kill them. We've had reduced numbers of hatchlings coming out, and their fitness has been compromised. But we are getting some good clutches emerging, and hopefully once this hot weather ceases, it's starting to taper off now, we'll start getting our normal large clutches emerging. So it just shows you how the weather affects different animals on this planet. all based on evidence from science and collecting data, and that helps us conserve this species.
While media emphasises climate change, I always look at hidden accelerators. Over decades, I've seen changes in aquatic environments following the history of runoff from rivers loaded with heavy agricultural chemicals, running into oceans and current systems, and how this compromises many species. Turtles eat seagrasses and sponges that absorb chemicals, many which have endocrine disrupting capabilities. This can transfer into their eggs. Phytoplankton and planktonic larvae also absorb chemicals, just like soils and plants would on the land. When two words, climate change, explain man's destruction, the truth behind the environmental collapses is often silenced, and the harm drifts away in the currents, but doesn't disappear.
We are overfishing, acidifying, warming, polluting, putting plastics in our oceans, our life support. It's absolute insanity. And if we want to have a future on this planet for our kids and their kids, we've got to protect our primary life support, our oceans. We've got to protect the Great Barrier Reef.
The first emotion, of course, is sadness. But the one that really rises up in me is almost a fear of what we've done. That, you know, this single species has brought probably the world's most biologically diverse ecosystem that contains 25% of all species in the ocean to its knees.
If we think about some of the great environmental travesties of our time and of the climate crisis that we know is affecting us right now and is going to continue to do so, we as communities need to make it politically shameful and economically impossible to perpetuate these environmental crises. So we need to stand up to corporations. We need to tell our politicians that we want to protect our forests and bushlands. We want to protect the Great Barrier Reef, and we want a safe climate for our future and for future generations.
The best plan of attack is for people to make their outrage known.
There are thousands of people who have hit the streets of Brisbane to show that they want to do something positive.
The political class is forever under the sway of vested interests who want to see business as usual in coal and gas and oil. It's got to be laid on the line to them that this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable because it could wreck our civilisation and our way of life.
Obviously, the biggest impact threatening our reef is climate change. If we continue to allow fossil fuels to be our main source of energy, we're just going to be exacerbating the biggest threat that's left us, with 50% of at least the Australian Great Barrier Reef.
Building a clean, green future is incredibly mineral intensive. An electric car takes 6 times the mineral input of a petrol car, and wind turbines need 9 times the input of a gas plant to mine, smelt and crush all the lithium, copper and silicon. Globally, energy demands have exploded. A massive surge of over 1,000 terawatt hours of new electricity needed every single year since the mid-2020s.
Energy grids all the way along this place, lines of them cutting right through the bushland, far as the eye can see.
We are burning record amounts of coal in places like China and India to keep up with a manufacturing boom. These countries desperately buying energy commodities in other countries to feed a never-ending chain of destruction, creating an unprecedented surge. Global financiers seizing opportunity grab for the climate change economy, extracting billions of dollars out of countries through carefully crafted and climate-friendly dialogue.
a global sales pitch fueled by mega billions of dollar marketing campaigns. In 2015, the biosecurity rules of the trade game changed. Australia swapped strict physical border checks for an automated, risk-based compliance model. It was a corporate system built for speed, designed to keep global trade moving, but it set off a disastrous chain reaction that would echo from our dirt to our oceans. With economic stimulation green-lit, the funding gates burst wide open. The focus was to slow down global environmental loss under the fossil fuel banner economy. But with it, it fueled a wave of mineral acquisitions, with corporate giants buying up lithium flats in South America, nickel mines in Indonesia, and copper deposits in Africa to secure long-term profits. Other funding pathways were also labelled conservation initiatives. Localised pests and weeds, once managed in small targeted pockets, suddenly could access multi-billion-dollar national security crisis budgets. I spent 3 weeks walking through Christmas Island forests to find evidence of the yellow crazy ant frenzy. In 2001, early trials with the chemical fipronil started. In 2002, parks launched major helicopter drops with high concentrations of fipronil bait. In 2009, 2012 and 2014, subsequent aerial campaigns rolled out. But scientists switched to low concentration fipronil formula to limit extinctions to wildlife. In 2015, this program was phased out altogether due to the extinctions unfolding on the island. With hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding at risk and massive quantities of high-risk pesticides being big business, the yellow crazy ant syndrome arrived to our oldest rainforest in the world. Australia's own chemical gatekeepers, APVMA, failed to secure the safety of our country. Allowing deadly substances like 1080, paraquat, fipronil, and a smorgasbord of endocrine disrupting chemicals to become an economic boom. With marketing budgets in full swing, all they needed was to exercise the new biosecurity laws by convincing our leaders a pest was a national security disaster. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money later, while committing the ultimate ecological sabotage. When those intense rains hit and the poisoned earth can't absorb the water, millions of litres of those intentionally rejected highly toxic chemicals flush straight into our marine sanctuaries.
So we've come down the river and we've hit a patch of what I reckon is a scum line, very typical of what we see in the rivers these days when too much chemical is being used. But you can see this patch is full of residue on the surface and the water just doesn't look right. I'll show you a good example. When our coral reefs are already stressed by human-induced threats, even trace amounts of imported pesticides can cause thermal tolerance to completely collapse. It triggers catastrophic mass bleaching. The bleaching doesn't stop at the corals. The chemical plumes are down every river in Australia.
and these plumes strip the oxygen straight out of the water, suffocating fish in mass and destroying the vital seagrass meadows that feed animals like turtles and dugong. When the Great Barrier Reef bleached in 2016 and 2017, the world started paying attention. Politicians desperately funded foundations like the Great Barrier Reef Foundation with a carefully selected corporate board. One of the first calls to action was to blame the crown of thorns starfish and fund yet another chemical program to inject the crown of thorns on the reef, adding more chemicals to a compromised environment. All the time controlling the scientific narrative to blame climate change. But one area not investigated have been the new chemical programs, which released dangerous chemicals into the catchments that fed from our Great Dividing Range into our Great Barrier Reef current systems. Chemicals create imbalances in water quality, feeding high nutrients into aquatic environments, which species like crown of thorns, who are in some ways nature's way of cleaning up the pollutants, thrive on. As other countries banned deadly chemicals, Australia committed to aggressive, broad-scale eradication programs, including massive, automated national fire ant, regional weed eradication programs, and deadly programs fueled by billions of dollars of corporate incentives. Paying a heavy use board of directors, in effect, paying polluters along the way, destruction of ecosystems and chemical programs failed to take any responsibility. The science that banned these chemicals in other countries was simply cast aside, and media censorship begun. Australia had become a dumping ground. Pesticides completely banned in China, Europe and the UK, and dozens of other nations due to their severe environmental and human health risks. But they think it's okay to send it to us. But as billions rolled in and the carbon economy thrived on trading offsets, the hungrier the world got for technical advancements. But if carbon is fundamentally an element in all of us, the matrix behind the climate change campaign is in fact a massive spreadsheet. Heavy populated countries exhausting their resource supplies turn to the rest of the world to supply their needs. Of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations 2030 Agenda, in Australia, possibly 1 or 2 were being met. And they were the goals that encouraged economic growth and massive infrastructure, as well as technical rollouts. But as industry thrived and the green image became big business, you need a powerful distraction. And the corporate matrix running Australia's green transition has mastered the art of the scapegoat. They don't want you looking at the thousands of hectares of ancient forests, being levelled for transmission grids. They don't want you questioning the toxic chemical processing plants altering our water tables. So they deploy a psychological front. They launch highly publicised, weaponised media campaigns targeting iconic visible animals like brumbies and dingoes. They brand these wild animals as the ultimate eco-villains, convincing the public that the destruction of our national parks is entirely nature's fault, all while the corporate heavy machinery slips in behind the headlines, completely unnoticed. While they use brumbies and dingoes as the public fronts to blame for land degradation, they're actively trading our most sacred native icon, the koala. Corporations are literally allowed to buy paper credits that claim to protect a patch of trees somewhere else, giving them a legal license to bulldoze real living koala habitats for green infrastructure. Our wildlife has been turned into a corporate currency. And the poison doesn't stop at the fence line. They apply broad-scale chemical programs, toxic pest baiting and heavy herbicide spraying across millions of hectares. But you cannot poison one link without snapping the entire chain. When you spray a neurotoxin or a chemical herbicide, it leaches into the soil. It kills the native microbes, poisons the insects, starves the birds, and bioaccumulates up the ladder into our mammals and apex predators. They are systematically poisoning the entire chain of life. Snowy Hydro operated a licensed cloud seeding program to increase snowfalls until scientists submitted papers showing silver oxide was damaging to snowy gums. But then they started an even more toxic weed control program in 2023. After 3 years, the environmental damage of the ant and weed programs has been so intense, the spraying has been halted. Many animals like brumbies were falsely accused to take the attention of the changing ecological landscape. However, brumbies have lived in the mountains hundreds of years, carefully adapting to their landscape in complete contrast to a century of industrial expansion. But why do they go to these extreme lengths? Why poison the very earth they claim to rescue? Because if they can convince you that our ecosystems are collapsing from the inside out, that the crisis is driven by feral horses, wild dogs, invasive weeds, and an unstable, self-destructing natural world, then they successfully shift the blame away from industrial corporate expansion. They want to convince us that climate change and ecological collapse are failures of nature itself, forcing us to rely on their corporate green tech and chemical investments as our only salvation. They are sacrificing the entire web of life to protect a balance sheet. After decades of documentaries, I tire of writing the same script. Only when the last old growth stand is cleared, millions more marine animals are poisoned, and the brumbies and dingoes are gone after being framed. will the green tech take over, taking away our farmers and our lives. Perhaps then we may wish we'd created a different story. A story about a world of beauty where we can admire a wild horse whose evolutionary chain and existence on this planet is much greater than ours. I long for the day I can tell a different story, how the dingo is a beautiful Australian icon. Maybe he'll learn to trust man and not be shot. Perhaps we can realise that ants help maintain the soil we need to sustain life, and to poison them affects all the chain of life. But nature isn't the problem. The corporate monopoly board is. It's time to stop looking at their fronts, see the entire chain of life for what it is, and take back the truth. From national ant programs, to national weed programs, to culling and killing programs, killing sharks, killing brumbies, killing dingoes, killing kangaroos, killing anything that moved, it seemed Australia was on a mission to either poison or kill just about anything. Even people, pets, and wildlife stood in the way of corporates and their profits.
We lost 11 beehives. My neighbour lost 16 beehives after they poisoned his land and aerial baited his property.
There's the poison. Since 2009, we have commodified the survival of our rarest species to build the green economy. We have traded the certain life of the northern quoll and the koala for paper credits. In 2025 alone, we approved the bulldozing of 57,000 hectares of threatened habitat. We call it nature positive. And while the horses in Kosciuszko get the bullets, industry is blasting 45 kilometres of tunnels through our highest alpine regions, flooding the area with toxic chemicals and creating algal blooms that flow down the rivers across multiple states. As long as we pass the problem to nature, the rivers, oceans, reefs, marine life and wildlife suffer. Large algal blooms are not just the result of two words, climate change, but because we are trading our Earth.